Lena was the kind of woman people noticed when she walked into a room, not because she tried to be the center of attention, but because she carried herself with quiet confidence. Everything about her life seemed polished, and her job, her apartment, her clothes, even the way she spoke. She worked as an executive at a large company and spent most of her days in meetings, calls, and endless planning. People admired her discipline and strength. She had built a life that looked perfect from the outside, but what no one really saw was how lonely she felt when she came home at night. She would unlock the door to her beautiful apartment, kick off her shoes, and be greeted by silence. There were no sounds of laughter, no family waiting, no one to share dinner with. Her success came with a price. Years of chasing goals had left her with little time for herself, and even less time for love. Her closest friend, Mia, often told her she needed to open her heart again. "You can't live your whole life behind work emails," Mia would say over coffee. "You deserve someone who sees you, not your job title." Lena would laugh it off, saying she was fine, but deep down, she knew she missed the feeling of being cared for. One Friday evening, Mia called with that mischievous tone in her voice that Lena knew well. "I've got something for you," she said. "A surprise," Lena frowned. "If this is another networking dinner, I swear—" "It's not," Mia interrupted. "It's a blind date," Lena groaned immediately. "Oh no, absolutely not. I'm not doing that again." "Yes, you are," Mia insisted. "This one's different. He's kind, real, and not from your corporate world. You've been too closed off lately. Just one dinner, that's all I'm asking." Lena hesitated. The idea made her nervous. The last time she tried dating, it ended awkwardly. Someone more interested in her position at the company than her personality. But there was something in Mia's voice that softened her resistance. "Fine," she said with a sigh. "One dinner. But if he turns out to be a weirdo, you owe me lunch for a month." They both laughed, and Mia promised it would be worth it. She texted Lena the details. A quiet restaurant near the harbor, Saturday evening at 7. "Just be yourself," Mia added before hanging up. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering who this mystery man could be. She tried to imagine his face. Probably someone confident, successful, maybe a little older. Someone who could hold an intelligent conversation. It had been so long since she'd felt butterflies for anyone that she almost didn't recognize the feeling. The next day flew by. She spent the morning catching up on emails, cleaning her apartment, and convincing herself that she didn't care how the evening went. But by late afternoon, she found herself standing in front of the mirror, holding up different outfits. She finally settled on a navy dress, simple yet elegant, and a silver necklace her mother once gave her. It made her feel grounded, less like an executive and more like herself. At 6:30, she grabbed her keys and purse, gave herself one last look in the mirror, and whispered, "You've got this." The weather outside was cloudy, the air heavy with the smell of rain. She called for her car and began driving toward the restaurant. The streets glistened from an earlier drizzle. Soft music played on the radio, but her mind was elsewhere, imagining small talk, introductions, maybe even laughter. For the first time in a long while, she felt nervous in a good way. Halfway there, drops of rain began to fall again, gently tapping the windshield. She turned on the wipers and slowed down. The traffic lights reflected on the wet road, glowing red and green like watercolor. She tried to relax, humming along with the song on the radio. Then, out of nowhere, a pair of headlights flashed from a side street. A car ran a stop sign. She slammed the brakes, heart racing, but the tires skidded on the slick road. In a terrifying instant, the world spun. Metal crunched. Glass shattered. The sound of the crash filled her ears, followed by silence. When she opened her eyes, everything was blurry. The smell of smoke and rain filled the air. She tried to move, but pain shot through her body. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, but her fingers wouldn't respond. Voices echoed somewhere nearby. Then, darkness. She woke up in a hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and the soft hum of air conditioning. Her vision cleared slowly. A nurse stood beside her, adjusting something on a monitor. "You're awake," the nurse said softly. "Just take it easy." Lena tried to speak, but her throat was dry. "What happened?" "There was an accident," the nurse explained gently. "You were brought in 2 nights ago. You're very lucky to be alive." 2 nights? Lena blinked in confusion. Her head pounded and memories of the crash flashed in pieces. "Can I move?" she whispered. The nurse looked uneasy. The doctor will explain everything once he's here." When the doctor finally arrived, his expression was kind but serious. He checked her vitals, asked a few questions, then sat down beside her bed. "Lena," he began, "you suffered a spinal injury during the accident. The good news is your upper body is stable, but—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Your lower spine took a severe impact. Right now you can't move your legs." Her heart dropped. "What do you mean I can't move my legs?" He spoke slowly. "You have partial paralysis. It's too early to say if it's permanent, but we'll do everything possible to help you recover." The words hit her like a wave. Partial paralysis. The phrase echoed in her mind, cold and heavy. She stared at the ceiling, refusing to believe it. Just a few days ago, she was running a company, walking into meetings, planning a date. Now she couldn't even move her legs. Days turned into weeks. Physical therapists came and went, teaching her how to adjust, how to sit up, how to use a wheelchair. Each session was exhausting, not just physically but emotionally. She hated needing help for simple things like getting dressed or reaching for a glass of water. Friends visited at first, bringing flowers and encouragement. But as time passed, the visits grew fewer. People returned to their lives while hers felt frozen in place. Even Mia came less often, though she tried to stay positive. "You're strong," she would say. "You'll get through this," but Lena didn't feel strong. She felt broken. One evening, as rain pattered softly against the window, Lena stared at her reflection in the glass. Her hair was shorter now, her face pale. She hardly recognized herself. The woman who once gave speeches to hundreds now struggled to get through a single day without crying. The blind date she was supposed to go on became a painful reminder. She never found out who the man was. The restaurant probably held his reservation, waiting for someone who never came. The thought made her chest ache. Sometimes she wondered if the universe had played a cruel joke on her. One moment she decided to open her heart again, and the next everything was taken away. She tried to pray, to find meaning, but most nights all she could do was stare at the ceiling, asking, "Why me?" Months passed, and she was transferred to a rehabilitation center. Her schedule became a blur of therapy sessions, doctor checkups, and long hours of silence. She stopped answering calls, stopped checking work emails. For the first time in years, she wasn't needed by anyone. Each morning, the nurses helped her dress and wheeled her to the therapy hall. She went through the motions, stretching, trying to lift herself, learning balance, but her spirit felt numb. The therapists encouraged her, but she rarely smiled. She had lost the fire that once defined her. At night, when the halls were quiet and the world outside had gone dark, she would close her eyes and imagine what could have been. Maybe she would have met her blind date. Maybe he would have made her laugh. Maybe they would have shared a story over dinner. Instead, she was here, trapped in a body that no longer listened, surrounded by strangers who called her patient instead of her name. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a small spark of hope refused to die. It was faint, but it was there. The thought that maybe, someday, something good could still happen. She didn't know how or when, but she couldn't completely give up. And though she couldn't see it yet, the person who would change everything for her, the one who would walk into that rehab center and remind her how to smile again, was already closer than she realized. Because sometimes, life has a strange way of turning tragedy into unexpected grace. The first few months after the accident felt endless for Lena. Every morning began the same way. The quiet hum of hospital machines, the sound of nurses' shoes on the floor, the smell of disinfectant in the air. Time seemed to move slower here, as if the world outside was running while she was stuck in one long, unchanging moment. The doctors had told her that recovery would be slow, but she didn't understand what slow really meant until she lived it. Every movement felt like a mountain. Sitting up without help took weeks of training. Lifting herself from the bed to the wheelchair left her drenched in sweat. Even brushing her hair became a small battle. What hurt more than the physical struggle was the silence that followed. People stopped visiting as often. The first few weeks after the crash, she'd received flowers, cards, and endless messages. People telling her to stay strong and get well soon. But soon, the world moved on. Work replaced her, friends got busy, and her phone that once buzzed with calls now lay silent on the bedside table. Some nights she would scroll through her old photos, pictures from meetings, company events, vacations she once took alone to escape the stress. In every picture, she looked strong, confident, unstoppable, Now she barely recognized the woman in those photos. Her therapist, a kind older woman named Ruth, tried to keep her motivated. "You're doing better than you think," she would say. "Progress isn't about walking again. It's about fighting through the pain each day." But Lena didn't see progress. All she saw was loss. Loss of freedom. Loss of control. Loss of the life she built so carefully. She often stared out the window during therapy, watching people walk past outside. Couples holding hands. Children running. Workers rushing to catch buses. She envied them all. One afternoon during a particularly difficult session, Ruth encouraged her to move her legs slightly. "Try again," she said gently. "Don't focus on the pain. Just focus on the movement." Lena clenched her jaw and tried, but her legs stayed still. "I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You can," Ruth said. "Maybe not today, but one day." Tears filled Lena's eyes as she turned away. "What's the point? Even if I learn to move again, I'll never be the same." Ruth sat quietly for a moment. "You're right," she finally said. "You won't be the same. But that doesn't mean your life is over. It just means it'll be different." The words stayed with Lena long after the session ended. She didn't know if she believed them, but part of her wanted to. The rehabilitation center became her new world. Every hallway, every nurse, every wheelchair squeak became familiar. Some patients were cheerful, always chatting and cracking jokes, while others stayed silent like her, lost in their own pain. In the evenings, she often wheeled herself to the garden behind the building. There, the world felt a little softer. The air smelled of wet grass, and the sound of rustling leaves reminded her that life still moved forward, even if hers had slowed down. One evening, she met a woman named Claire, who had lost the use of one arm in an accident. Claire had a warmth about her that made people feel at ease. She told Lena stories about her own recovery, the frustration, the anger, the days she wanted to give up. "Do you know what kept me going?" Claire asked one night as they sat watching the sunset. Lena shook her head. "Hope," Claire said simply, "even when I didn't feel it. Even when it made no sense. Hope doesn't heal your body, but it keeps your heart alive." Lena smiled faintly but didn't reply. Hope felt too fragile to depend on. As the weeks turned into months, Lena began noticing small changes. Her upper body grew stronger. She could now transfer from the bed to her chair with less help. The therapist cheered her on, celebrating every bit of progress. But even then, she still carried a heaviness inside her that refused to fade. The accident hadn't just broken her body. It had broken her confidence. She used to lead meetings with power and certainty. Now she hesitated before asking for help with the simplest things. The woman who once managed hundreds of people now felt helpless managing herself. One morning, her doctor suggested she join a new therapy program that included vocational and emotional support. "It might help you connect with others going through similar experiences," he said. Lena hesitated but agreed. Anything to escape the quiet sadness of her room. The group therapy sessions were awkward at first. A circle of people, each with a story of pain and loss. Some had lost limbs. Others were recovering from accidents like hers. They shared moments of fear, anger, and gratitude. When it was her turn to speak, Lena paused. For a long moment, she couldn't find words. Then she said softly, "I used to think strength meant not needing anyone. Now I don't even know what strength means anymore." The group listened in silence. One man nodded slowly. "Maybe strength just means showing up," he said. "Even when it hurts." Something about that sentence stuck with her. Maybe he was right. Maybe strength wasn't about pretending to be okay. Maybe it was about surviving the days that didn't make sense. A few days later, while she was in her room reading, Mia called. It had been weeks since they last spoke. "I'm so sorry I haven't been there," Mia said. "Work has been crazy, but I think about you all the time." "It's okay," Lena said quietly. "I'm fine." "You don't sound fine," Lena hesitated. "I'm trying." There was a pause. Then Mia said, "You remember that blind date I set up for you?" Lena let out a small laugh, the first one in weeks. "Of course I remember. That poor guy must think I stood him up." "Well," Mia said, "he didn't take it personally. He just asked if you were okay when he heard about the accident. He said if you ever wanted someone to talk to, he'd be there." Lena was surprised. "He said that?" "Yeah," Mia replied. "He's a good guy. Simple, kind, works as a mechanic. I really think you would have liked him." Lena didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to ask more, but she couldn't imagine talking to anyone new right now. Maybe someday, she said softly. Someday, Mia echoed. After the call, Lena stared at the ceiling, thinking about the stranger she was supposed to meet. What kind of person waits for someone who never shows up and still asks if they're okay afterward? Whoever he was, he sounded genuine. For a brief moment she smiled. It surprised her how good it felt. As time passed, Lena continued to make slow progress. She began learning how to move her chair independently, how to navigate ramps, how to handle small daily tasks on her own. Each victory, no matter how small, brought a flicker of pride back into her heart. The staff noticed the change. "You're getting stronger," Ruth told her one morning. "And not just physically. You're starting to look forward again." Lena didn't know if that was true, but she was trying. She spent more time in the rehab garden watching the mechanics who volunteered to fix the patient's equipment. They worked in a small shed near the therapy hall, often covered in grease, chatting cheerfully as they repaired wheelchairs and walkers. She didn't know it yet, but soon one of those mechanics would step into her life and change everything. But for now, she was still learning to live again, one quiet day at a time. Every night before bed, she would whisper to herself, "Tomorrow will be better." Sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it was worse. But slowly, the days began to carry a lighter tone. She started noticing small joys, the sound of birds outside her window, the laughter of nurses down the hall, the smell of fresh coffee in the mornings. Life was still there, waiting for her to reach out and grab it again. And though she couldn't yet see it, the next chapter of her story was already moving toward her. A meeting that would begin not with a romantic dinner or a perfect first impression, but with the squeak of a wheelchair and the sound of tools clinking in the hands of a man who would remind her what it means to smile. Lena's days at the rehabilitation center had started to follow a quiet rhythm. Morning therapy, lunch in the common hall, short breaks, and then more sessions. It wasn't exciting, but it was her routine. It gave her something to hold on to. She had grown used to the same faces: nurses, therapists, a few volunteers. They were kind, but they all treated her like a fragile thing. They smiled too softly, spoke too carefully, and walked away too quickly. Then one morning, something different happened. She was sitting by the therapy room window, watching the drizzle outside, when she heard a loud metallic sound from the hallway. A few seconds later, a man appeared at the door, pushing a cart full of tools and spare parts. His uniform shirt was wrinkled, his hands slightly stained with grease, and there was a calm, steady look in his eyes. He wasn't dressed like anyone else who worked there. No badge, no clipboard, no white coat. Just a plain mechanic's shirt with a small name tag that read Ethan. He nodded politely at the therapist, then looked around the room. "Got a report that one of the wheelchairs here needs fixing," he said in a deep, even voice. The therapist pointed to the corner. "That one's been making noise. The front wheel keeps locking." "Got it," he said, crouching beside the chair. His movements were quick but careful, like someone who'd done this 100 times before. Lena tried not to stare, but there was something about him and the quiet focus, the way he worked without showing off or rushing. Most people in the center were always in a hurry, but not him. He looked like a man who had all the time in the world. As he tightened the screws and checked the bearings, he glanced up and caught her watching. Instead of looking away, he gave her a small, easy smile. "You'd be surprised how many of these wheels just need a little patience," he said lightly. "Kind of like people, I guess." Lena wasn't used to being spoken to like that. Not with pity, not with sympathy, but like a person. She managed a polite smile. "Maybe," she said softly. "Though I think I might need more than a wrench to get fixed." He chuckled, the sound warm and low. "That's all right. Sometimes a good laugh works better than a wrench." Before she could respond, her therapist called her back to the exercise mat. When she turned again, he was gone, leaving behind only the faint smell of machine oil and the oddly comforting sound of tools clinking. Over the next week, she saw him again, in the hallways, by the garden, or fixing wheelchairs outside the therapy rooms. He seemed to appear everywhere at once, always carrying his cart, always whistling some tune under his breath. One afternoon, as she was trying to maneuver her wheelchair toward the dining area, the wheel caught on the edge of a rug and stuck. She tugged, but it wouldn't move. Before she could call for help, A familiar voice spoke from behind her. "Want me to take a look?" She turned to see him again, smiling with that same calm ease. "I think this thing hates me," she said. He crouched down, checking the wheel. "No, it just needs attention. Most problems do." In less than a minute, he freed the wheel and rolled it back smoothly. "There you go. Try now." She pushed gently and it moved perfectly. "You really do know what you're doing," she said. He wiped his hands on a small rag. "Been fixing things since I was a kid. Cars, bikes, lawnmowers, you name it. Guess I like bringing broken things back to life." The way he said it made her pause. There was no sadness in his voice, just quiet sincerity. "That's a good skill," she said. "Not just a skill," he replied. "It's therapy, for me at least." That day they talked a little more. About small things. The weather, how long she'd been there, what kind of work she used to do. He never asked too many questions, and when she did talk, he listened. Really listened. No polite nods, no pity in his eyes, just attention. When she told him she used to be an executive, he raised an eyebrow. "Big job, huh?" "Big stress, mostly," she said. He laughed softly. "Yeah, I get that. Sometimes people think running something big makes you powerful, but it can also make you tired." She smiled for the first time in a while. That's one way to put it. After that day, he seemed to show up more often near her therapy schedule. Sometimes he was working on a chair nearby, sometimes chatting with staff, sometimes just walking through. He never interrupted her sessions, but somehow, his presence made them a little easier. One morning, she found him outside in the garden, fixing a small motorized wheelchair. She wheeled closer, curious. "You're everywhere," she said teasingly. He grinned. "I could say the same about you." "You're making progress, barely," she said, half smiling. "I can move around without bumping into walls now." "That's something," he said. "Most people don't notice small wins, but those are what get you through." She looked at him, wondering what his story was. "You talk like someone who's been through it." He tightened a bolt and looked up. "Maybe I have. Everyone's got their scars. Some you can see, some you can't." Something about the way he said that stayed with her. There was no drama in his tone, no attempt to sound wise, just honesty. The next few weeks passed quickly. Their conversations became more natural, less guarded. He'd sometimes bring her small things to cheer her up. A funny story from one of the nurses, a magazine with car jokes, or a flower he found growing near the parking lot. She started looking forward to seeing him, though she wouldn't admit it out loud. There was something about him that made her forget, even for a few minutes, the heaviness she carried. One afternoon, while the center's power briefly went out, he came by with a flashlight. "Thought you might be bored," he said, grinning as the light flickered. "You came to rescue me from the dark?" She teased. "More like rescue the dark from your mood," he said with a wink. She laughed. A real laugh, the kind that surprised her. She hadn't heard herself laugh like that since before the accident. When the lights came back on, he looked at her with a small, satisfied smile. "See, works every time." "What does?" she asked. A little laughter, he said simply. "It reminds you that you're still here." Their bond grew quietly. He never treated her like a patient, and that was what she appreciated most. He asked her opinions, shared stories about fixing old cars, and even joked about teaching her how to use a wrench someday. "Me? Fixing something?" she said once. "I can barely open a jar." "Then we'll start small," he said. "The trick isn't strength. It's patience." One rainy afternoon, he found her sitting alone in the garden, staring at the wet path. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Some days I think I'm fine. Then it hits me all over again. Everything I've lost." He pulled up a chair beside her. "You know, when I was younger, I lost my shop in a fire. Everything I'd built gone in a few hours. I thought that was it for me. I sat in the ashes for days, angry at the world." She turned to him. "What did you do?" "I rebuilt it," he said. "Not right away. It took time and help. But one day I realized sitting in the ashes wasn't going to change anything. So I picked up what was left and started over." She was quiet for a while. "You make it sound simple." "It wasn't," he said with a small smile. "But I learned something. You don't rebuild the same thing you lost. You build something new." His words settled deep inside her. That night she couldn't stop thinking about them. Maybe she couldn't have her old life back, but maybe she could build a new one. One day her therapist noticed the change. "You've been smiling more lately," she said. Lena shrugged. Maybe I just have better company. Ruth smiled knowingly. The mechanic? Lena blushed slightly. He's different. He doesn't treat me like I'm broken. That's probably because he sees the part of you that isn't, Ruth said softly. Later that afternoon, she saw him again, fixing another chair near the hallway. This time, she didn't wait for him to start the conversation. You know, she said, rolling closer. You never told me why you volunteer here. He paused, setting his wrench down. A few years ago, my brother was in an accident. He spent months in a place like this. I used to visit every day, and I'd see how much a working chair or small repair could change someone's mood. After he recovered, I promised myself I'd give back somehow. That's really kind, she said quietly. He shrugged. It's not kindness. It's just being human. Everyone needs help sometimes. She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. Thank you. For everything you do, not just for me, but for everyone here. He smiled back, eyes warm. Any time. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized how different she felt. She still had hard days, days when she cried, days when she doubted, but they didn't crush her the way they used to. Something inside her was healing not just her body, but her heart. And though she didn't know it yet, this quiet friendship would soon turn into something deeper, something she never expected to find again. For now, she closed her eyes and whispered softly to herself, maybe hope isn't gone after all. Outside, the rain tapped gently on the window, and somewhere down the hall, she thought she could hear the faint sound of tools clinking, a sound that, for the first time, made her smile. Lena's days slowly started to change, even though she barely noticed it at first. The mornings didn't feel as heavy as they used to. She still woke up with pain in her legs, but the emptiness inside her chest was no longer crushing her the way it once did. Maybe it was because Ethan kept showing up quietly every few days. He'd never call before coming, but somehow he always arrived when she needed a bit of light. He'd push open the rehab center's door with his usual grin. Carrying his old toolbox and smelling faintly of oil and metal, she used to think that smell was unpleasant, but now, whenever it filled the air, she felt oddly comforted. Ethan wasn't the kind of person who spoke too much, but when he did, his words had a way of calming her. Sometimes he'd tell her about his work at the garage, the strange customers he met, the cars that refused to cooperate, the days that went wrong but still ended with laughter. He made ordinary life sound warm, like something worth waking up for. One afternoon, he found her struggling to move from her bed to her wheelchair. Her therapist had stepped out and Lena's hand slipped. She froze in frustration, feeling helpless again. Without a word, Ethan rushed over and steadied her. "I've got you," he said softly, his hand firm on her shoulder. She looked away, embarrassed. "I hate this," she muttered. "I can't even do the simplest things anymore." "You're doing them," he replied. "Just not the easy way yet." That line stayed with her for days, not the easy way yet. It sounded so gentle yet so powerful. From that day on, Ethan started helping her practice small movements during his visits. He taught her little tricks to make things easier. How to shift her weight, how to keep balance while reaching for something. Sometimes they laughed when things went wrong, and she'd roll her eyes when he made silly jokes to lighten the moment. Once, while fixing her wheelchair, he said, "You know, this chair is built stronger than some cars I've repaired." She smiled. "So you're saying I'm driving a luxury model?" "Top of the line," he grinned. "Only problem is the driver is too stubborn to read the manual." She laughed for real that day, the first time in months. It wasn't forced or polite. It came from deep inside, surprising her. Ethan looked up, his eyes warm. "That's the sound I was waiting for," he said. It was strange how such simple moments could mean so much. There was nothing romantic about them yet, nothing planned or dramatic. It was just two people, one learning to live again, the other quietly helping her believe she still could. As weeks turned into months, Lena started joining group therapy sessions. She met others with injuries like hers, and she began to speak up, sharing her fears and hopes. Ethan would sometimes sit in the back, quietly listening. He never interrupted or drew attention to himself, but his presence gave her courage. Her physical strength improved slowly. She could move from the bed to her wheelchair without help. She learned how to drive a modified car. Every small victory felt like a mountain climbed. One day, Ethan suggested they go outside. "You've been staring at these hospital walls too long," he said. She hesitated. "What if I can't handle it?" He smiled. "Then we'll handle it together." He wheeled her out to a nearby park. It was early spring. The air smelled of fresh grass and blooming flowers. Children ran around, people laughed, and the sun shone brightly. Lena looked around, and for the first time since her accident, she didn't feel trapped. Ethan sat beside her on a bench. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. "It feels strange," she admitted. "Like I'm seeing the world for the first time again." "That's a good thing," he said. "Sometimes we forget how much beauty there is around us until life forces us to slow down." They stayed there for hours, talking about everything: her childhood, his small-town roots, her love for travel, his dream of owning a workshop one day. Their worlds were so different, yet they understood each other in a way that felt natural. After that day, they started going out more often. Sometimes it was just a drive around the city. Other times it was coffee at a quiet cafe. She even visited his workshop once. He proudly showed her the cars he was working on. Some old, some new, all shining under the dim light. "Do you ever get tired of this?" she asked. He chuckled. "Every day. But I still love it," she smiled. "I wish I loved my work like that again." "You will," he said simply. "You just need to find your reason." His words echoed in her mind long after that. She began thinking about her company, her team, and all the dreams she had before the accident. Slowly, she realized she didn't have to give up that part of her life. She just had to approach it differently. One evening, she invited Ethan to her apartment for dinner. It was her first time cooking again, something she hadn't done since before the crash. She struggled with the ingredients, dropped a few things, and burned the rice a little, but Ethan didn't care. He took one bite, grinned, and said, "Tastes perfect." "You're a terrible liar," she laughed. "Maybe," he said, "but I mean it." They talked for hours that night. When it got late, Ethan stood to leave. Before going, he paused by the door and said quietly, "You've come a long way, Lena. You should be proud." She smiled faintly. "I couldn't have done it without you." He shook his head. "You were always capable. I just reminded you." After he left, she sat in silence, her heart full. She looked around her apartment, once a place of sadness, and realized it finally felt like home again. Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened. There were still moments of frustration, of tears and pain, but there was also laughter and warmth. Sometimes she caught herself thinking about him more than she wanted to admit. She liked his calm energy, his simple kindness. One afternoon, while adjusting her wheelchair, Ethan mentioned something that left her stunned. "You know," he said casually, "we were actually supposed to meet before your accident." She looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" He smiled shyly. "That blind date your friend arranged, and that was me." Lena froze, the memory of that terrible night flooding back. "You were the blind date?" He nodded. "I waited for a while, then heard about the accident the next day. I didn't want to bother you after that, but when I saw your name on the volunteer list here months later, I thought maybe I could help." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened. The man who had quietly changed her life was the same person she was meant to meet the night everything went wrong. She laughed softly through tears. "I can't believe this." He rubbed the back of his neck, smiling awkwardly. "Guess the universe really wanted us to meet, just not the way we planned." Lena wiped her tears, shaking her head. "You waited all this time and you never said anything?" "I didn't want you to feel pressured," he said. "You had enough to deal with." Her heart swelled with gratitude. "You could have walked away," she said quietly. "I thought about it," he admitted, "but something told me not to." There was a long pause between them, the kind that didn't feel uncomfortable, just full of understanding. That night, when he left, Lena sat by the window looking out at the city lights. For the first time since her accident, she didn't feel broken. She felt alive. Everything suddenly made sense. The accident, the pain, the waiting. Somehow, all of it led her to the one person who saw her not as a patient, not as a fallen executive, but simply as herself. As the clock ticked softly, she whispered to herself, "Maybe some disasters aren't the end of everything. Maybe they're just the beginning of something we didn't know we needed." And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. After that night, Lena couldn't stop thinking about what Ethan had told her. The idea that he had been her blind date, the one she was supposed to meet before everything changed, felt almost unreal. Life had played a strange trick on her, but somehow it didn't feel like a cruel joke anymore. It felt like destiny had simply taken the long way around. Days went by, and something inside her shifted. She no longer saw her wheelchair as a symbol of loss, but as proof of how far she had come. She began to notice how her body, though slower, still had strength. How her heart, though once broken, had learned to heal again. Ethan kept visiting just as before, but now there was something different in the air between them. They didn't need to say much. Sometimes just sitting in silence was enough. He'd fix something small in her apartment or make her laugh with his silly jokes, and she'd feel a warmth she hadn't known in years. One evening, she decided to surprise him. She called her assistant and arranged a small event at her company, a presentation for new accessibility projects she had been quietly working on. It was her first public appearance since the accident. Ethan didn't know about it yet. On the day of the event, she wheeled herself onto the stage. Her colleagues, who hadn't seen her in months, stood up and applauded. She smiled, a little nervous but proud. "I used to think strength meant being in control," she began. "Now I know it means learning to accept help, to keep going even when everything changes." Her voice trembled a little, but the room was completely silent. "This accident took away my ability to walk, but it gave me something else, a new perspective. It showed me that courage isn't about pretending to be okay. It's about finding light when you think you'll never see it again." The crowd clapped, some with tears in their eyes. She spoke about new designs her company would implement: ramps, accessible elevators, and home-based technology for people with disabilities. She didn't just want to go back to her old life. She wanted to build something better. After the speech, she looked around and saw Ethan standing at the back of the hall. He hadn't expected to see her there, but when their eyes met, he smiled with quiet pride. Later, when the crowd left, he walked up to her. "You were amazing," he said softly. "I was terrified," she admitted, laughing a little. "You didn't look it. You looked like the woman who used to run a whole company without breaking a sweat." She smiled. "That woman fell apart, but she's learning to rebuild." He nodded. "And she's doing a damn good job." They went out for coffee afterward. It was one of those evenings when the city lights seemed gentler, and the world didn't feel so harsh. Ethan stirred his drink slowly, then looked at her. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you'd never let anyone in." She chuckled. "You weren't wrong, but you did," he said. "And I'm glad you did." Lena felt her heart race a little. "You changed me more than you know," she said quietly. He looked down, a bit shy, as he always was when things got emotional. "I didn't change you. You just remembered who you were." There was a long pause between them, not awkward, just full of meaning, the kind of silence that says everything words can't. Over the next few months, their friendship turned into something deeper, something neither of them rushed. They spent weekends together, sometimes fixing things in her apartment, other times going for drives outside the city. She began learning to use walking braces, determined to push her limits. Ethan always stood nearby, ready to help but never taking over. One afternoon during one of their walks in the park, she stopped and looked at him. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. He knew exactly what she meant. "The blind date?" She nodded. "Sometimes," he said with a half smile. "I used to think maybe it wasn't meant to be, but now I think it happened exactly the way it should have." She looked out at the trees swaying in the breeze. "It's strange. I thought that night ruined my life, but now, I'm not sure I'd change it even if I could." He turned to her gently. "You really mean that?" She nodded. "If it hadn't happened, I never would have met you." He smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "Then I guess I should thank destiny for being a little messy." They both laughed softly. It wasn't dramatic or movie-like, just real. Two people who had walked through pain, now standing in the sunlight again. Weeks passed and Lena's progress continued. She started mentoring other patients at the rehab center. She spoke to young people who had faced injuries like hers, telling them her story, helping them find strength. Ethan often joined her, fixing chairs, sharing jokes, making everyone feel lighter. Together, they brought hope into rooms that used to feel hopeless. One morning, Lena received an invitation to a business award ceremony. She had been nominated for her new accessibility initiative. It felt surreal. She hadn't even realized how much she had accomplished in such a short time. When she told Ethan, he grinned. "You're becoming famous," he teased. "Don't remind me," she laughed. "I'd rather be known for something that matters."